You're tuned into the Diva and the Unk, episode 2,
Hi.
why they should stop talking.
Exactly why they should stop talking. We're here to master voice and visionary leadership. I'm Monifa Harris, your diva in flow, and I'm helping you unlock the power of presence and voice.
And I'm Rael, aka Everybody's Unk, here to build conscious culture and sales that feel like.
Every episode, we blend a little soul, a little strategy to amplify your leadership style.
And help you move through life with purpose, clarity, and real alignment.
That's right. You ready to turn up that resonance? You're gonna start amplifying that vision. We're over here.
Let's get it.
Let's get it. All right. So why they should stop talking? What are the theys? We didn't really say.
That was title.
It's my idea. So I'll go ahead and say why they. So I was thinking along the lines of why men should stop talking or man-like pundits.
All pundits are male, by the way.
Yeah, really?
Mostly.
I don't think so.
Pundit is an expert.
Oh my God, well then definitely not. So even if I don't know the definition. But yeah, but that I think personally I wanted to go this route because also it can come from every direction, from how we think about matters of state, how we think about matters of business, and how we think about how we connect in community and who we are to each other. And a lot of times it is like us versus them. It does start to feel that way when it takes such an extraordinary amount for voices to be heard that aren't the norm, right? And I feel like there's a lot of misinformation that runs from the man camp of male pundentage. Sounds like a pendant, doesn't it?
Yeah. I think what we experience, especially today, is when I was coming up, there's like the men folk who get to talk. And if you're an adult woman, you could be in a room, but your opinion really wasn't that heard. But if you were a kid, you couldn't be in the room at all because it was grown folk talk.
Grown folks only.
And I think that over the last 2 to 3 decades, we've seen this explosion of, I would really say, women coming into their own voice. And, I grew up with it. I saw my mom, I saw the boomers in droves as feminine go into the workforce, be the breadwinners of their families, and really be successful at it if you were really being honest. And so we're in the midst of that generation now, having children and young girls who grew up in that energy, who are now taking to another level, which is fine. I've raised 2 of those girls, although they fit a statistic. My daughters fall into statistic of being unmarried without children. And we're at the highest level in this country where we have more women who don't have children and are unmarried than we ever have before. So it's a double-edged sword. There's an independence and a power that's bringing our feminine and our femininity in this country or in the world, quite frankly. But there's also what that looks like when it's not balanced. And I think we're experiencing the unbalancing of that. But just like everything, it's a pendulum. It swings one way too far, it swings the other way too far. And we're really starting to click back to the middle with these younger generations. You're starting to see it.
Personally, I think because there was so much to be said, because so much was unseen and uneven examined, especially in the public landscape, it was inevitable to, that big swing for women to be outspoken and for just to be like purely men need to get out of the way and just listen for like a hot second. It had to happen because in order for us to even become even slightly catching up, because I don't even think that it's caught up. I think it's just fractured off, right? We have more people talking, more people having platforms. And so but we have the same problem. We mostly listen to people who are bigger, louder, stronger.
No, we mostly listen
And
to people who
faster.
are saying the same stuff we're saying.
Well, and that's because the most people's viewpoints grew up with the age of less women talking. A lot of people, including women, and I would also include the non-gendered and people that are living under the umbrella of difference. Most of us still had the impression that it was going to be a tall white male that had a high raw energy at the front of the room. We just and even in our politics, that's typically we're looking at as like assumed victory. Um, and so that hadn't changed until very recently. And I think it's still part of what the landscape looks like because I think a lot of attention, especially in the last election, went to these places where they were somehow trying to define the new kind of masculine leader but without any attention to the balance that still was needed to be maintained. And I think a lot more males, especially males that are seeking, are starting to change that. But like the ones that are actually doing something about it, I don't know that I'm seeing enough of that because it still has to be enough of the alpha male energy that other males will listen. I don't know how far we want to get into that because we're going to have like a whole masculine and feminine energy thing coming up.
No, but I will touch on it only because it's the pendulum, bro. Like, it's just being a man. I think we got lost in that we started, I wouldn't say misappropriating masculinity, but it just got to swing too far. And in that swinging too far, a lot of people felt ostracized with, especially society, because we were so male dominated that the males that were reaping the benefit of that domination were feeling threatened because a woman, a really good, powerful in her femininity and in her experience and in her education of a field, her expertise in a field. A woman who is balanced in all of those things in her field and is a high achiever is a much more powerful figure than a man in that position because we've seen it so much in men that it's like Tony Robbins talks about, we crave certainty, but we also crave uncertainty. We crave things the way they are, but we also crave things to be different. So I think with a woman who is truly, and I don't like using the word boss, but you girls like it. So in her boss beingness is,
So
but with this pure leadership and femininity, it's a very powerful figure.
yeah, I agree. I feel like a fully empowered woman who stands in her truth and authority on all levels is intimidating, and I do think that in times there's often times I feel sorry for men in the position they've been put in because it was kind of like looking at certain camps again that were just automatically considered grandfathered in by their culture, skin color, whatever you want to call it, but they just automatically assume they'd be welcome, automatically assume that they have rights to be in a space. Anybody who can do that we call privileged, right? But we all have these levels of privileges, and I think men have this level of privilege, like all men in all cultures have this level of privilege that hasn't allowed them to be like just
Vulnerable to anything else.
well, not well. They are. I mean, unfortunately, men of color are definitely still vulnerable in several ways, but mostly that they don't have the vision. They don't have the ability to see through certain ideas, certain things, because they never had to. Women have always had to kind of work harder to
work
understand,
around.
know things, and be able to be clear in how we're respected in the field by measuring up in certain ways. So we're better at doing research or better at doing a lot of different things because we've had to be to get into the positions that we've been in. And I think but the other side of that is, since you didn't really say it, there's like a lot of women that are speaking up that are again part of a privilege. So they're still talking a lot about women in at home and women in the kitchen. I think that's a matter of privilege. I'm a first generation American. Like no woman in my family was staying home and cooking. Like, like they may be coming home to cook, but they're not staying home to cook. That's a wholly different scenario. Um, and so it's still kind of that feeling of like blindness that you can just talk like that when there's people who literally that their children aren't going to make it if they're not going out and doing what they need to do. So I think it's just this like who's talking and
Let's not
how
forget about the
how
women
much
who,
do we want to listen to these people? It's what I really wanted to bring up.
yeah, but you also have to look at the women who can be home because she has a man who's doing all those external out of the home things
Yeah.
and um, be fulfilled with her children and her home. And you see them now and they're on TikTok and they're making videos about their lifestyle, and people are starting to gravitate to it. Young women who haven't seen that in their generations, these young women haven't seen, on a massive scale, women like that, where I kind of grew up with it. Well, I grew up where it was starting to change, but it was still a lot of women who were home. But at that time, if you asked them, most of them would say they weren't fulfilled because as society was changing and there was so much more to offer, right? You know,
They were asking a question if they had more options, would they have chosen something else,
of
which was
course.
totally valid. And I think too that again in that swing to women being leaders and in charge and that kind of thing, that we have a tendency to imply that this being good means the other being bad, which I think a lot of people take or as an assumption, but I think rarely do people say say these things like outright. I think it's kind of like when they were doing Black Lives Matter and they're like all lives matter, and it's kind of this idea. It's like, well, yeah, but right now we're focused on this right now because we're still working to do that. Everybody that wants to work is getting a position that they're qualified for, right? And so because that was still something that had to be worked on, that was the conversation. So in that conversation, there became this othering of people that were choosing something else, which I don't think is okay. But I think that's the problem with having these perspectives that said there's only one right way to go. There's a best way to go for everybody. I think that's when we start getting into trouble with some of these
I think
conversations.
we're so far down this rabbit hole of, and honestly, I really do think it's about, everyone really trying to really figuring out who they are. My belief is that, I was on a championship high school winning football team, and we had some of everybody. We had the crazy guy, we had the guy who was straight up and followed every rule. We had the guy who followed no rules. We had guys in between. Um, and we were very diverse. I grew up in a very diverse city. So, you know, we were almost like Remember the Titans, without the heavy dose of bigotry, you know. And I don't use the word racism because I think a lot of times we're confused by these words. It's a phrase that if you looked up would scare you, and it's called tricknology. And tricknology is just like a wordplay. It's like court. It's like when you go to court and lawyers and judges use these words because these words have double meanings. And if you don't understand these double meanings, you can be in trouble legally. So they started using these technology words to sort of create this dissension, and I would just say human growth, and it has stunted our growth a lot. When they say man is the head, as pleasing as that sounds to some men, the head as a function is just a thinker. There's nothing else that goes on in the body. It doesn't outside of the head. The body creates more chemicals. There's more functionality. The central nervous system runs through the body and completes at the brain. But the thing is that there's just so much in between what we saw that we are now experimenting in that people get confused and the words start to send us off track in one way or another. And that's where I think we are. But I think, I used to say this all the time with people of color, when we started coming out of Jim Crow, what was happening in the other society, you know? And so the true test of freedom is to do things freely, to do things that you were restricted from doing before. Now we want to go. So I just saw, it's just the nature of human, of being human and being in a body that needs experiences to grow.
Yeah, as it comes to just the ability to be able to do the things that we weren't able to do before, I think again on different levels, this works across the board, as far as I can tell. But like for whether that be a woman being able to go to work, a woman or a man being able to stay home and take care of the children.
That's correct.
Whether that on a lot of these things, what we're really saying is who has the floor when we're starting to say that there's a right way to do it and those people should shut up, right? Like, and so what I know for sure is that arguing has a purpose, right? That arguments can be good and they are healthy when we are listening as well as seeing. Um, First of, like, I kind of wanted to bring it to our relationship again because I think a lot of people, when they're talking about, what makes a relationship work, why, how did you stay married as long as you have, or in a relationship as long as you have, and we usually bring up the fact that we argue pretty loudly. We argue well and loudly.
Well, we argue. We don't really fight. We debate. I like debating, and so I win most of them, by the way. Most of the time, it's you're fighting for a position that was given to you. It's not even a position that you hold. There's so much of what triggers us isn't even really a real position. It's a position that we've had in terms of that was passed down to us from our parents. It's a position our parents would have held. It's a position one of our favorite teachers was passionate about. It's not even really our position. So in debate, you get to hear the other side. If you do it in a way that's civil and I'm not talking about getting angry or getting loud or being passionate about the way you speak, because that's part of debate,
Well,
passionate
and
speaking.
that's what I don't want us to like kind of push under the rug because a big part of the reason why it works is because we are both emotional. And so, but we're also both contemplative, we're self evaluating, so we're not going to just bust up over anything. But if there's an emotional, like, kind of that hasn't been taken care of, it becomes an argument. And I'm sorry, but I don't know anybody who's fully emotionally regulated. And I'm sure the people that are happy in their regulation.
They are publicly regulated. They're privately, they're unregulated. Like most people, like you have a public face and you have a private face. You have public energy and you have private energy.
I think a lot of times when we're looking at success of people that accomplish a lot with a little, or people that are going far, and continuing to build and expanding in not just one way, not just a linear way, but expanding in ways of being human across the board. I think a lot of that is because they have had tools for emotional regulation, either from their families or given to them through getting help, at certain
Or
levels when you can
mentorship.
start getting mentorship or even being able to afford or get a therapist. And I don't know, people say they can get that on kind of government, but I don't know anybody who has. And I don't know what, who's fault. I mean, it could just be accessibility, but it could just be like people that think that they don't need it, right? But yeah, but I think that's the thing is that in order to be able to be in a healthy relationship, you have to have a point where you're able to assert who you are and what you're thinking, and that is important to you. And if you never come up against each other in that, then you kind of have to wonder if you're saying everything, is how at least I see it.
I don't know. I mean, I think all people are different and approach things differently, but I think a good relationship has a good amount of agitation in it. Like there has to be for growth. We don't like each other all the time, but it's not like we hate each other. And when I say don't like, I mean it from the perspective of, well, I don't feel that way about what you said. I don't agree with that. So you sit with it and you figure out, even if after sitting with it, you're still where you were before you started sitting with it, that's fine. It's a matter of,
I mean, a lot of things we don't agree on, but it's never gotten in the way of us taking care of life together.
no, I mean,
I mean, we've chosen to kind of like, at least chosen to like kind of just separate out for a little bit while doing the self contemplation.
well, not separate out. That looks like somebody saying, well, you guys have been separated before. No,
No,
we have
not like that.
We
Like,
haven't taken a break or
I've
anything.
never put him on the couch. I'm not that person. And he wouldn't agree to that.
I go to the couch. You ain't got to put me to a couch.
I mean, you'll go to another room, which is
Well,
my
that's the
point.
same thing. The
It really
metaphorical
isn't
couch.
because the other room
That's
has a
a
bed.
metaphorical couch. When people say they're going to sleep on the couch, they're going to the bedroom. It's metaphorical. It ain't the couch.
Not
Please.
especially not in sitcoms. They literally go to the couch and their legs are hanging off and they're like in the morning like
It's
that.
the metaphor. We're talking about real life. We're talking about no TV personalities. TV personality, when you have a spare room or your man cave. If you have a man cave, then you're going to go to the man cave. You'll sleep in the man cave. Oh, be up on video games all night. Oh, you know what I mean? It used to, but that's just literally what men would do if you wanted to separate yourself. I've always been a person who's valued being alone. Like I love my alone time. So if I'm going to leave the room and not sleep in my own custom bed, then you know what I mean? I'm doing that mostly because I just want to be alone, not because I don't want to be in my bed.
Yeah, or I don't know. But I feel like that's the thing, that knowing where you need to be, like taking time for yourself if you need time for yourself. I think that's important. Especially if you do tend to be extra passionate and get super angry and say things that you wish you hadn't said or do things that you wish you hadn't done.
Which I don't do.
Which I don't know. I wouldn't say
I
that.
might say things that you don't like, but I don't say things that I regret.
This is the thing. Like I mean, a lot of the things, especially when you're angry, are going to mirror each other. Which is, if you're really doing that time, or you're, sitting to yourself and going to yourself and thinking about it, you're going to hear the same thing that you've been telling them, and eventually you're going to either like squash it, or or you're going to apologize, right? Like
Most of the time, you're saying the same thing. It's just people say things differently. People express what they're like. I said, a lot of stuff that we do is from someone else. It's the way they would have said it. It's the way you've seen it done that you've admired. It's not necessarily the way that you would want to say it. Like,
I mean, I don't know. I think a lot of it is a trigger. Like you say, when you say
Correct.
trigger,
Now you're
it'll
falling
bring up
down.
the stuff that happens in the,
Correct.
yeah, from your family and how they dealt with it. But it can also bring up like how whatever your coping mechanism is, which can be different from family. So you want to know what that is for yourself. And we're going to keep coming back to this um, because one of the things that I think that we need to know is that like what it takes to not be silenced, which is like kind of the original point of this show was about healing generational silence. Why does it have this ability to tell us how we communicate with each other in this now time and space when now is now, right?
Yeah, but now is also part of the cycle that you're in.
So, and how do we move out of that? So I kind of picked up a couple of our patterns for me when I feel like I'm not being heard or I feel like I'm being silenced. It's usually to some point of like I'm being good at something. So a lot of times, like early and like a long time ago, so it's really a long time ago. Like it used to be like to me, what I was hearing was wasn't a useful person or I wasn't a good wife, right? And it wasn't really him saying that. It was my vision of myself because I knew that the traditional wife was nothing that I was or wanted to be, right? Like there was just nothing about it that appealed to me. So I didn't think I was going to get married before I met Daryl because of that. And from what I could pick up on from Daryl, I don't know how he say, but it's basically that he wants to be seen as true, as right when proven in history. He's much more of a historian than I am. He likes the stories. He likes to know what hasn't been told in history. And so when when his arguments come up, when he gets loud and stops listening or feels like he's not being heard, it's usually something around being right, being over, uh, like being right for years. Like, so he'll go back, well, I told you 10 years ago that this is going to happen.
That's not
And
trying to be right, right?
so
That's just telling what is actually happening.
he's telling what is true in the historical record.
Correct. That's not trying to be right. That's just the way it is. And and that's what Mendel, we come from the historical point. We come from, um, you know, I see a pattern, I'm 9 years old in her, so I've seen patterns for longer. I've seen patterns in relationships longer. I know who I am. I know how I respond to certain people. I know how that story is going to end if what you're doing continues. So when I say those things in the moment, the only way for a person to believe you when that moment reveals itself that you spoke about, you have to tie it together. And over the years of tying those things together, there becomes an understanding. So now when I say something, hey, when you do this and in this way, in this relationship, my response is going to be this. And so then in that moment now, after repeated patterns being shown to be the way, well, he's kind of right. That did happen. So if he's saying it can happen in this situation because this is happening and in this way, then maybe there's an opportunity to stop it from happening because there's a history of someone saying something, seeing what the pattern looks like, a pattern that you haven't experienced, by the way. Let's always remember that. But for me, I've always been a person that, the old saying goes, the saying is to be sold and not told, you know. So excuse me, the game is to be sold, not told. because until someone puts skin in the game, meaning you have a stake, you put up some money, or you have, your ass on the line about it, until you have some ante in the game, right? You're not going to appreciate it. If there's no skin in the game for you, there's no sense of urgency. There's no, oh God, I see that now. I don't want to lose my stake. So let me be more proactive. So, but if you told someone the game, if you give them, hey, this is going to happen, that's going to happen, you're going to regret it, you're going to get mad at me, blah, 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 they're not going to listen because you're telling them. They don't have any skin in it. They don't have any recollection of what could possibly happen because there's no stake. There's no, I'm putting this in. And that's what marriage is. Marriage actually allows you to put a stake in the game. Your skin in it. You got skins in it. And over time, when these things play out, you grow. You know.
Yeah, I agree with that. Something that especially when I was younger, right? Because he is older than I am. So like, especially when I was younger, I didn't get why he felt certain urgency about certain things. So there were certain, things that I think that he did say early on that like this is important. And I was just like, whatever, So and it did come back to bite me. But my point always is that it's more important to say what we want from now forward. I feel like it's important to also to say that he's right, but he never hears that. He never. I don't know what it is, but again, it's some function of like that. I guess because I didn't listen the first time, that I just never know. Like I'm permanently stupid. I don't know. I don't know what he thinks. I don't understand, but like when I hear something, and I know it's right, I'm just like, yeah, that's true. That doesn't feel like enough for him, so he always is continues
So
to
it's
continue
not
the
that it's not
argument.
enough. The part when she's saying and that you think she's literally verbalizing, well, yeah, that's true, and you're correct. Those aren't verbalized things. Those are things that went on in her mind, and she's agreeable to it. But I never heard.
Okay, so that's true. Okay, I probably because when I hear something that's right, I'm just like I just feel it and I nod. So I think sometimes I think I say it and I don't say it, but I do purposely say it several times and it still doesn't work. So, um, so I always am looking at, well, let's decide how we want it to be moving forward instead of dwelling on what's going on in the past. But like again, to both, we're saying the same thing, right? What's the best way of doing it? And hoping to help have somebody to be on the same team as you or be in agreement with you. If you want to be able to be in a position of guidance, you first have to see it from the way they see it and not invalidate it, right? I remember one time, like early on, you're trying to tell me how you felt about something, and because of my perspective from my family and like what I had decided for myself, which in a lot of ways was just as a generalization, that emotions weren't useful, right? And so Daryl's trying to tell me how he felt about something, and I just automatically assigned he's a man. He just says stuff about emotions to manipulate you so that you'll do what you want. It's like somehow that's that was the programming, whether I did it to myself or the culture did it to me. And he was just like, I can't believe, like, what did you say? You said something like, yeah, I'm pretty sure you don't. Like it was about, but you were like you totally disregard my feelings. And I was like crushed. Okay, I know you probably didn't know that. But like in my heart, I was crushed. Like I was the person who was very sensitive to feeling. I was very sensitive to emotion, and then therefore I felt like I was always able to feel other people's emotions and was very sensitive to how other people were feeling. And to hear from my husband that I wasn't listening to his how he felt, like I just was like that was like the hardest thing for me to realize what was, but it was the truth. I wasn't listening, right? So, and I had to come back and sit with myself and be like, I never want to have to, like, I never want that to be true again. Like, I never want to be in a place where I didn't hear how he was feeling, right? So, but that's what we do is like because of how we thought or our patterns, we shut down our listening skills, and that's the danger of arguing is if you are not taking the time to breathe, if you're not really tuning into how you're really feeling and just acting out of feeling instead of feeling how you're feeling and communicating it, right? Like that's where I think people get in trouble. Where Daryl's like does it naturally, I have to sit with it longer, especially if I'm really upset. It takes me longer to kind of.
That's sales. That's literally the experience of hearing no's from people because sales and entrepreneurship, it's a no business. It's almost like baseball. Three out of 10 successes make you successful, but 3 out of 10 means you failed 7 times. So we used to tell young people it's a no business, but your yeses are amazing. And so you're always getting through no's to get to yeses. So, and in that way, you really, it's not even, I'm not even going to say mask. I wanted people to know that I was disappointed they were saying no. I didn't want them to think that, oh, you said no, and, it was okay. No, I want you to feel crappy too.
That's the same.
Because I don't think I've ever sold a product that could hurt people. I've always tried to market things that benefited people in some way and would put them in a better position moving forward. You have to be proud of the things that you market to people. You have to be sure of its manufacturing, of the service, and all of those things. When you're sure of, then you can confidently talk to a person and get their needs met with your product through product knowledge and understanding how it benefits them, um, which is something people, when they're talking to people who sell things, have a guard up against agreeing. So, yeah, I've had a lot of experience with getting the unagreeable to agree.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I think even as a method of communicating with family, like when we first got together, him and his younger brother were having issues and weren't talking a lot. And they're very close family, so they're always, calling each other and everything. So it's like, he never called, but it was very rare.
We weren't feuding. Um, we weren't angry at each other. We just had some unresolved issues.
Yeah, I mean, but that's the thing is that in my family, if you have unresolved issues that aren't causing a very obvious problem, like money or somebody's not able to get medical care, like, then it would have never gotten addressed, like never. But Daryl was once he realized what was going on, as soon as he knew what was going on,
As soon as I knew that I was the reason why.
he did something about it. He had the conversation. He said what was important for him to say about what
Role.
his role, what might have been felt or heard or seen or whatever, and like where he was in that situation. Um, and and I think he even apologized.
Think about it.
Yeah, because it wasn't what like he didn't want him to have felt that way. So, and which I thought again was very big of him because he didn't actually do anything. So it was kind of this thing of like the relationship was more important, right? And it was more important to have the conversation than it was to like maintain this facade of like, yeah,
of a relationship with your brother.
right. It wasn't gonna stand on his account. Like, and even when we talk to my sister's kids, and I would back off, like, and I still do often. I'm just like, okay, they're preteens, they're teenagers. Like, there's only so much I'm gonna get out of them, just from my experience. And Daryl just asks again and again and again, and he'll might change the question a little bit, but he's coming back to the same question again until they answer it. He's the very he gets very determined to actually know what they're thinking, not the kind of flippant answers that kids tend to give when they're trying to not
To avoid the question.
Yeah.
Um, for those with teenagers and things of that nature, and your teenager is, as most teenagers are, avoiding one-word answers and, you know, and whatever, that type of energy, that is just so fun to dismantle. Like it is, I used to say, with my kids, to my kids' mom, like, yeah, I can outsmart them. You know what I mean? Who can outsmart? I mean, today it's different. These kids have Google, they can Google stuff, and more than likely, most parents haven't dealt with their own issues. So when your kid can trap you in your own feelings,
They're so smart. Like, I mean, I don't think it even has anything to do with Google. They just seem to know certain things, even like relationship things that, again, most kids just don't have that level of insight. They might feel a level of insight, they might be empathic, but they're not knowing, like,
you don't know.
Like the psychology and the angle to come from until now.
But I used to say it like this: when you think about a toddler, you think about a young person, and you say no to them, right? So they don't know the definition, the dictionary definition of no. They just know it's something you don't like, and when you don't like it, you feel a certain way toward them. And so they associate no with the feeling in the way you make them feel when you say it. It's like, you know, that stop. When you tell a kid to stop, you know, they're going to stop because you're giving them the universal don't do that sign. And they don't necessarily know exactly what stop means. They just know that it's best to not do what they were doing when they hear that word. So it's not like they have a Webster's dictionary encyclopedia in their head that goes to the word and says, this actually means to not do, to cease and desist, to put down, but the feeling that you give them when they're doing it is how they relate it to the word. Well, the same thing happens to us, who are not really sure of the definition of something, but the feeling that we get from it informs us, sort of psychically almost. There's this feelings inform, right? Now, if that information feeling that you're getting is informing you that there's danger, then you're going to do something different. You're going to not want to be in danger. You're going to, if there's pain that can occur from that feeling, then you're not going to want to be in pain. I think for most people, they've just gotten afraid because social interaction isn't like this requirement to have fun, to have a good life, to have people in your life. You don't necessarily have to be with someone anymore, present wise. You can go into the VR world, you can go into chat rooms, you can get on social media, and I think you feel more free in those platforms because you don't have the social interaction that you would be informed in that moment how what you said made another person feel, right? So if you're a bully at home with your little baby cousins, and then when you get to school, and you start bullying people, you really start feeling how, okay, me doing this is making that person feel that way, and I can feel what they're feeling. Now you have a better informed idea of what bullying is.
Right. So, and I think that in the way that being the person that is being repressed or oppressed or suppressed, and that silencing is how I think of it usually. um, it it's that choice, like whether you're going to stay there. Often at times it can be a self-preservation, and if it's a physical thing, obviously
Correct.
that's probably the right stance to take.
Until you can,
Unless you have your skills. I mean,
well,
comedians tend to get out of things pretty well. If you are good at like refocusing attention, pretty much you can do whatever you want to do. But I think for the majority of people, unless it's a skill, you can develop the skills. But
all
until it's a
skills are
skill that
developable.
that happens under pressure, then that's a whole nother level. That's what I talk about as performance, because you can only, like, you're taking a chance in something on real time, whether it's going to succeed or fail. And so that's where usually the anxiety will come up. And like, even if you know better, you don't always do better because you're having a trigger response. Maybe your nervous system is taken over into fight or flight, and you're not able to access everything you know.
Which is why visualization is so important.
Yeah, visualization can really help with that. But I think for the person who has a tendency to shut down or to not talk about it or to not want to sit with your emotions until you get to clarity, then that challenge is basically of being aware of the challenge, that you need to be able to know for yourself, if this is a point of safety for me, or am I preferring the safety to what I know needs to be said, whether that's out of the truth that is what I feel and think is valuable and needs to be heard, or whether that is part, like, is to have a real relationship, to have a close relationship, you have to be honest, right? You have to be honest, and you have to be listening as well, right? And then the unknown, but I think there's always that kind of fear of the unknown when you're making that choice. It's like, well, I mean, I know, but because that would be my reaction, or maybe, I guess mine, but most of my family's reaction in that situation that we talked about earlier with Daryl's brother and he, which was, like, there was nothing, like, they've been kind of, I mean, they had the way
Drifting
of
apart.
talking. It wasn't like they didn't talk at all. It wasn't like, it was just that it wasn't, warm, and it wasn't,
It wasn't the
connected.
relationship that we wanted.
Yeah, it was, and it wasn't, and they knew it would be better. But again, in my family, like, there's a lot of relationships like that, and nobody does anything about it, right? Nobody says anything or finds out why, why it's happening the way it's happening. And so, and that's the choice, like, because basically you're saying, like, what choice you are making in courage, which I don't know if you realized at the time, but like in my family, is the fear would be that it wouldn't work out, that it would make it worse, that well, before he didn't know you did it on purpose, and now he knows, right? Like, that
Mm.
somehow made the situation worse or hurt him more, in some way, shape, or form, and so that you wouldn't even want to approach the situation. So, right, so like, that's kind of the why it tends to come up that way in our family, is that there's always this, like, well, it's not totally broken, leave it alone, kind of feeling. But that's what it takes to be, like, that courageous step and say, no, I'm going to reach for the better relationship. I'm going to reach for a honesty, and in a way that we can understand each other, right? And to not let the unknown intimidate you into silence.
Yeah, I mean, most guys, especially guys who grow up in, like, inner city, you're part of your friend group. It's like a pack. you feel like you're always going to want to be in the pack. There's safety in the pack. There's community in the pack. There's like-mindedness in the pack. And then as you get older and you start to spread your own wings, I found my person, and so I don't really need a pack. This is my new pack, but I still needed close relationships outside of this new singular pack. I wanted me and my brothers to have better relations. But it's like she said, not that we had terrible relationships. That wasn't it at all, but it wasn't one that was close, tight, tell you everything type of relationship, and uh, that's what I wanted, especially from my brothers.
Yeah. Well, and it's, I think, well, you were talking with your cousin the other day about like kind of the new way you choose family. And sometimes you have to re-choose your family, right? You can't just,
Yeah, especially nowadays.
like, it's not assumed anymore, at least not in our family. And it's always kind of like it's something that you have to choose and put energy into to keep that up. And it takes a truth of knowing yourself and knowing where you stand, who you are. A lot of the arguments I had with Daryl in the early parts of our marriage defined me more clearly to myself. And then it also gave me the wherewithal to be able to get really clear so that I could be focused enough to respond. So a lot of times, because Daryl has a lot of energy, when his energy is coming at you, it really does kind of take over a room. And so, if I hadn't had stage training, I probably would have just like kind of lay down and cried type of feeling. But I had not only had stage training, I'd lived in Boston, which you really do. You have to learn how to like protect your space.
Your
You got to
skin's
be
got to
able
be
to be
so thick in Boston.
like, before I knew anything about energy, I realized I had to carry myself a certain way so I didn't get stepped on in Boston.
Oh yeah.
Like it
Or
was
ignored, or see, Boston has this way of like belittling you from this nonchalantness, like I don't care about you, so why would the door stay open? You know what I mean? Like they just really have a way of like not seeing you, in this super ass cold place. you know, it's it's super cold.
You would think I'd want to cuddle so that
Right, and they're
keep some kind of warmth going.
and
Nobody hugs in Boston. Like, you know how like in the
it's-
South you just see people hugging on the street? That don't
yeah,
happen in Boston.
which is why when they drink, they're so out of control. It's like
There's
Boston,
no release.
Boston is it's a very weird city, and I lived there for almost 2 years as well, long before she got up there, and it was really my first venture out of state, moving out of state, and I loved it, and then I saw it, because I started doing bouncing up there. It was my first. It was also when I stopped drinking from this coming from, and I worked downtown, so they were all corporate people, and within 30 minutes of a person walking in, they're a whole new person, like, and not in the better way, and I saw that in Boston, and it was really kind of upsetting.
Well, what I want to finish with really is this understanding of the importance of in order for your words to be heard, in order for us to know each other better, so we can be in better communication and relationship. Is how I see that. Um, we have to know our tendencies in of ourselves, and we have to care about the tendencies of those we're connecting with. It's important to state your piece, and it's important to be in enough feelingness of another person that you get to say it in a way that they can hear you, and not everybody will hear you, but there's a much better chance if you're clear with who you are and you're open to who they're being, right?
Yeah.
And so my point around that is not having a biased truth. Like you want an unbiased truth. And a biased truth basically says, well, because I understand what you're saying, I'm going to change who I am to meet you where you are, right? Like that's a bias. That means you're working from two premises. There's no impact there, right? I'm going to change who I am, who I think, or who I think you want me to be.
Correct.
I'll become that so that
Not
we
really.
can be on the same page. That it doesn't work.
No, because you're only performing that. That's
not who you really are. So not only you may have not had the argument, but now there's no true connection because they're not speaking to you. They're speaking to some facsimile of what you thought you needed to be.
Yeah, speaking to an avatar they're trying to build you to be.
Unbiased truth. You need to come from your unbiased truth, who you really are, how you really feel, and then maybe using words that are closer to their cultural understanding. And that can be in 1,000 different ways. I don't mean that literally as culture, just in the environment of which they're living.
Relationship is culture.
Relationship and feeling and the soup you're in, right? So that could also be like up for the moment. Maybe they're totally normally fine, normal most of the time, but now there's an element of jealousy or element of lack that's bringing on this other component to who they're being. So if we're listening to that, we're not gonna like take more away as to start the conversation when they're feeling lack. We're not going to, right? Like put them in even more, unless you're Daryl. But again, that's not because he's coming from a place that's not himself. He's coming from a place that's getting your truth.
That's right. I do it to get you back. I don't do it,
I wouldn't recommend that for the average person.
Yeah, but I enjoy it.
But even the bugging thing with the kids, those kids would just be like, oh my gosh. And they would like, run away, climb the stairs, whatever. Like these kids will just hang around until like I don't understand why, but like that's what I've seen them do it. So they just walk out of the room. But when Daryl does it and he's sitting there asking the same question for 20 minutes and they're still there. I'm like,
yeah, I get all the tea. I do.
It's annoying.
It's phenomenal.
So, anyways, but we'll give you a little bit of that secret sauce there. That's going to help you get there in enough yourself if that's part of what you're doing in your world. As always, we want you to know, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Appreciate you.
We have so much to give you and offer you, but we want to give you some gems first and let you get to know us a little bit first. But in the meantime, when you're out about doing what you're out there leading and doing and creating, remember, your voice is a portal, so use it with power.
And your presence is your product. Let it sell itself.
That's the truth. So much love to you guys. I'll see you next week on Diva and the Unk.